Hey kids, it's Jurassic James, and on this Jurassic James Explains, we're looking at cnidaria. Now, what are cnidarians? Well, if you watch the original, like their first Men in Black, they're an alien race that are really tiny that were demanding a certain artifact or something, and they were very angry. But in real life, in science world, cnidarians are essentially, to the common person, coral, anemones, and sea jellies. That's how you would know them today. The only thing to point out is that the cnidarians are one of the oldest life forms. They're in the fossil record. One thing to point out is that in the Idiocardon, before the Cambrian, before super advanced life, we have this from the safari tube. Now, this particular guy, it has been debated, and it's still kind of in the air, from my understanding, is that there's these things today called sea pins, and they were relative to cnidaria, and they look like them. But again, there's a lot of animals from the time before the Cambrian and the late Precambrian that we don't quite know where they fit in, and it's being debated and researched and dug up right now as we speak. So more on that at some point. But in the meantime, one of the earliest cnidarians that people really know of or can register are sea jellies. Now, the term jellyfish is actually inaccurate because they're not fish. The idea is that the word fish in biology it's like a paragraph of certain things, and particularly having a backbone is one of them, and fins and all that. But the word fish has been used very sparsely for anything in the ocean moving around, and this is actually not a fish, so it's a sea jelly. Now, one thing to point out, sea jellies is that they show up again in the Cambrian or before the Cambrian period. Actually, in the Precambrian, I'm sorry. So the idea is that they don't have brains, and people often have trouble understanding that. I know, like, how does it have a brain? I mean, we see dogs and cats in our world, but those are mammals. Birds are, vertebrates, higher vertebrates. These guys are a series of cells working together. So they're like a notch above sponges in a sense. But we do see the idea that they have like photic sensors. So we found in bacteria too that photic sensors mean they don't have like an eye that we would recognize in eyes, but they actually can sense light and dark. And the idea is that if you're in the water and the surface is light, and usually there's food that way, and it's dark is going down, right? One thing to point out with sea jellies too is they're stinging. A sea jelly, I know this is going to shock many of you, but it never wants to hurt you because, again, there's no brain to have want. The idea is that when it stings you, on their tentacles, they have little triggers called nematocysts. So say my arm is a tentacle. There's a little trigger here, and it's the size of barb. And the idea is if you hit the barb, the thing goes out and stabs you, basically. So they're not trying to sting you. It's just if you get near them, you brush against them, that'll hurt you, basically. So they do, of course, grab their food and prey, but they're not looking to hurt humans because they evolved before humans. So there's no need for them to care about us unless we're harming them, basically, right? There are very few, as you'd imagine, sea jelly models. In Houston, at least where I'm from, we had teacher supply stores, and now they're kind of going away. So I think everything's being absorbed onto the Amazon empire online. But the idea is that you can find these little like packs of 20 or 30 and have sea jellies, which of course is cool because if you are making dioramas of the prehistoric world, you want to have these kind of things because it's not just dinosaurs and like whales, So another group we have which I'm kind of grouping together, anemones and coral. So a sea anemone made really famous by Finding Nemo. They are essentially a sea jelly upside down. What I'm saying is they have tentacles that sting, and they actually will grab things and they'll bring it to them. And you don't see it in the model. No, you don't. But in the middle, there should be a mouth, basically. So the idea is that they grab things, put in the mouth. And what's really neat about all cnidarians is that they don't have, we eat food in our mouths, and what we absorb what we want from it, and then whatever's left over, the waste, we poop out, basically, right? Well, these guys don't have what's called a U shape or a gut. They only have like one hole, so they eat the food, and they absorb the nutrients, and whatever's left, they don't want, they kind of spit out. This is where, when I teach classes, the kids go, they freak out, right? But the truth is, if you have no brain and you have no taste buds, it's not a big deal. That being said, anemones have the same design, basically. And we see anemone-like animals in the fossil record back in the Paleozoic. But I have these tiny ones here. Now, the reason I'm comparing anemones to coral is that an anemone is like this, right? But coral, you often see structures like this. Now, these are the, like a pet store. You go and get the fish tank stuff. So I wouldn't suggest these for play. I'm not sure if the chemical setup for these, or, for children. But if you're making dioramas, if you're making setups, if you're making a shelf of cool stuff to show, I would suggest having these kind of coral. Now, bear in mind, in the Paleozoic, we had, well, in the time before dinosaurs, we had reefs that were maybe sponge reefs. We had reefs that were brachiopods, these little clam-looking things that are not clams, that had these reef structures, you know. So the coral reef isn't a fixture forever. It's more of a modern thing in our world. But for example, with this particular model, you see these little circles here, little pits. Not the big one, the little ones here. Those would all have one of these, but a tiny one on there. And they're called, and we use a short name from polyps. So they kind of fit there. So a coral is actually, well, a colonial coral has several of these little things here, and they're all filter feeding in their own way. Some of the best prehistoric art I'll see is a picture of like a coral, and you'll see the little polyps like sticking out. It's really, really neat. And of course, the last coral you'll see often the background stuff. So you'll see sea fans and brain coral here. So again, the brain coral is the little orange guy, the big one's a sponge, and then they have a sea fan here. Those are also cnidarians. So again, these are very simple life forms in the fossil records, but unfortunately, you don't find many of this set. You know, there are some coral that are called that are colonial. So you'll see something like this fossilized, and if you get polished down, it's called potassium stone in certain parts of America. But we have actually coral that are solitary, where it's just one little polyp and a little like a horn structure, and below that, and it sits like that in the water. Those are very not common, but pretty known fossils. They're called horn coral or goose coral formerly. But other than that, you see a lot more coral in the fossil record than the other guys. You do see sea jellies in the right conditions when you're in shale muds that are preserving it just right. But in general, you see more coral than that, basically. And with that being said, these are your models. If you want to have a cool background for these animals, there you go. Oh, also know sea turtles love eating these things. And fish, you know, just if you're doing your dioramas or food webs, know that. That being said, I'll see you guys later.